Giler, Gordon Carroll up at Fox in London, in Soho. And they said, would I like to do Alien? And I'd had a script. I thought the script was outstanding because as you read it, you knew it was going to be a good movie, or I thought it was going to be a good movie. And but I'd already signed to do Empire Strikes Back. And so I said, well, I'd love to do it, but it seems to clash with Empire. And Peter Beale said, well, it's another Fox production, I'll organise that. So he talked to Lucas and Gary Kurtz, I think, and I got the okay.
The original concepts of Alien were basically a series of storyboards, very detailed storyboards. Ridley Scott is well known for storyboarding every single scene. We had the special effects storyboards. We also had a whole bunch of paintings done by Ron Cobb, who was the conceptual artist they used for many of the spacecraft. The strange thing was that we never actually followed them because we kept on getting messages which would come from Shepperton, where the main unit was shooting, to Bray Studios, where we were filming the models, about 30 miles away. The drawings and plans that came over seemed to be sort of a conglomeration, as if somebody had taken Ron Cobb's design and they'd altered it. And we obviously found out afterwards that Ridley Scott was having a sort of a say in this and changing things. And actually Nostromo, the main craft in the film, it kind of evolved, and it evolved many times over a period of months and months, over a year, in fact, it evolved. It originally started out as this basic space tug. We shot on this thing with it actually painted yellow for 6 months, and this was the time when Brian Johnson was involved in the film. However, Brian went off to work on Empire Strikes Back, and we painted the spacecraft grey on Ridley Scott's orders, and then when Ridley Scott finished shooting main unit stuff at Shepperton, came over to Bray Studios, and we basically started from scratch.
Well, the plan was, the great plan, which of course Ridley had no intention of ever adhering to, was that the effects would be shot parallel with the main unit shooting. And Brian Johnson had that rather difficult task of actually doing that, and he shot some very nice stuff, but I know that Ridley knew that he could, in the same way that to jump to another movie, Blade Runner, he already wanted to look through the camera and line those shots up himself, which he did in the end, and it resulted in those incredible sort of city shots. Ridley was determined that he wanted to do them himself, so I think he kind of, consciously or unconsciously, he kind of said, no, that's not quite right, that's a little bit too... I think in fairness, I think the shots were a little bit too colourful sometimes, and Ridley I know you could grade them down, but Rid sort of had these specific ideas, really.
I was asked to organise a cameraman to work with the visual effects group. That I did, somebody I'd known several years before. I think Ridley kind of had words with the DP. I certainly had words with the DP, Denny Ailing. On the second Saturday of principal photography, Ridley told me he was going over to Bushy on the Saturday and asked that I go along there with them. And we went over there and we saw what Denny was doing for lighting. And I went through a kind of lighting pattern. I felt a bit sorry for Denny because he was trying to achieve something where he couldn't achieve the stop that he wanted based on the lights that he'd got. I think he'd been terrorized by the production office about how much money he'd got to spend on lights, and he really didn't have enough. The risk of getting my own backside kicked, I ordered in a lot of other equipment.
First of all, you get your model right. I mean, you get the model gnarly and aged the way you want it, all pristine and clear. You get the shape right, and then you got to walk around it with the lights. And this cameraman on that was Denny Ailing on all the effects. And we'd walk around, and I'd literally have him just on with the lights, pulling the lights around, and then just stand there and say, stop. And then he'd come in and look at it, and Denny would say, okay, it's too much here, it's too much, we've got to fill. So I always hated filling because I wanted to be really harsh. But Denny would always force me into filling. So we got to do a cover shot.
Initially, Ridley sort of viewed him with total and utter suspicion, but because he was actually a really good craftsman, he actually knew his job inside out, I think actually Ridley came to be rather fond of him.
What was cutting edge, which was actually we did not use, was motion control. And we didn't use it simply because the budget didn't allow us all that time to do stop motion photography. So we developed a camera which moved very slowly on a drive mechanism, but we didn't actually repeat moves as such, because at the time the shots that were written in the actual script made it possible for us to do just regular model work with a high degree of professionalism and extremely wide-angle lenses.
Some of these shots, like the planet shots, that was that very painful process whereby the camera moves one tiny frame per second or something like that. And so I remember Ridley wasn't happy, with what we were getting from it. So Ridley went in and shot it himself. And he said, put some smoke in there. And they said, we can't do that. The camera moves too slowly. The smoke is going to look, put it in, And he did it, and it worked. It looked great.
Because it wasn't on motion control pads, it was just operated. It was just physically operated. And that, because of that, I mostly kept the Nostromo close. So I didn't have to have stars and universe. So that's all just live shooting with a wind machine and a lot of smoke. And of course, people say there is no atmosphere in space. I said, there is now, mate. To make it work, I had no other way of doing it. I wouldn't have had any sense of movement because I couldn't afford big galaxy shots of it.
Working with Ridley Scott was quite an experience. It was nice to work directly with the director, with nobody in between, having a one-to-one relationship where I would go into a room, do a little drawing and show it to him, like of the clamp arm. It was nice that he would actually listen to me. I mean, I wasn't anybody really, I suppose, and it was just great to have him actually consider your opinion as well, but then come along and sort of say, right, but I want it done this way.
When you've got somebody like Ridley who's very precise about what he wants in a general term. And so like on Nostromo, that started off as a small sort of model, and then it grew, bits, pieces everywhere. Ron Cobb had done the original design, and then Ridley added bits to it. He kept saying, oh, let's put a bit on here and put a bit on there, because we were trying to build a large one, a large-scale one, which was about 10 or 12 feet. And it kept growing and growing and growing, and I think it wound up being about 16, 17 feet in the end.
Well, the biggest challenge has got to be the fact that Ridley Scott wanted things changed, but he would want to shoot on a model very, very short time after he decided to make radical changes. An example of this would be that we had a very, very cathedral-like refinery, which I'd done a large amount of the work on. He was very much into the sort of spire look, this kind of church spire type Gothic look. What he then did was he decided that he wanted a much chunkier looking refinery, so he would basically attack this thing with a hammer and chisel. And if you imagine you spent say 6-8 weeks working on a section, and suddenly he would literally pick up a mallet and a 1-inch chisel, bang, like this, and you'd see bits flying off all over the place. And so the challenge was he'd then turn around and say, right, after lunch I want to shoot on it, and I want that bit like this and that bit like that. And you're thinking, oh, we just spent 6 weeks doing that bit, and you want the shoot on this after lunch. So one of the biggest challenges was getting the model looking good quick enough for him to shoot on it. This is a sketch that I did at the time, which was really just a doodle of the refinery, showing the spire-like design. It was just really for personal use, to get a kind of a feel of how it would look as an overall design, with the Nostromo right down here at the front, the domes underneath, and then these massive spired pieces going up. These are the pieces which Ridley Scott later knocked off with his hammer and chisel. The Nostromo model weighed, somebody said I heard somebody say a quarter of a ton, but I don't know about a quarter of a ton, but it was incredibly heavy. It needed to be lifted on a forklift truck. So the model had a huge metal framework built inside it, and the Nostromo was plugged into by a forklift truck with a couple of sort of prongs on it, which actually fitted into the side of the model. And the way they achieved the Nostromo being pulled away from the refinery was that the arm itself wasn't actually motorised at all. It ran freely, and it was about 30 feet long It was a really massive thing. Again, clad with thousands and thousands, in this case, of Hornby Railway piers, all these crisscross girder pieces. Went into model shops and bought 150 of these kits. And when we told the guy what we were doing with them, I don't think they believed us. And this shot was achieved by the forklift truck being covered in black velvet, plugged into Nostromo, and just driving away from the refinery, dragging the Nostromo with it. And of course, as it pulled the Nostromo away, it dragged the arm with it. So that shot where you see it going out and coming away is just the forklift truck driving away on a nice smooth surface. Originally, the Nostromo had 3 huge arms which opened, but Ridley Scott came up with this idea in an actual conversation where it would be great if a giant hand pushed the Nostromo away. So I did a very, very quick sketch of this and showed it to him, and we needed to detail it really quickly. And we found that the legs of R2-D2 just happened to have this really nice shape, and you can actually see them quite clearly clad on this thing.
I think we had 2 or 3 different scales. We had one that was about 4 feet long, and we had another one which was 12, 14, 15 feet long. And that one was very heavy, and it was cantilevered out with a forklift truck device, so that on a beam which was covered in black velvet. And because of all the dust and stuff that was around, you couldn't see any of the mechanism, because we kept it lined up so the model was in front of it and the camera couldn't see it. And that was pretty difficult. I mean, that took a lot of effort, and lots of wind machines going, and plenty of vermiculite, which is an insulation for roofs and things, being blown around everywhere. Everybody had masks and goggles and everything else on, and earplugs and the lot. And in those days we didn't have radio communications the way you have now, with everybody's got their own little set and they can all join in. I mean, there was lots of shouting and screaming going on, thumping people on the back. Stop.
Nick, could we do that if we start level, almost...
We'd stop and they'd put the light, stick some lights on, etc., and reshoot it. And then he kind of created in front of the camera. And although there wasn't always huge logic to it, I just think the landing of the ship had, huge drama. It was very exciting. And I think, Jerry Goldsmith's music and everything worked great at that particular point.
He couldn't be burned off anything he had a passion about, and so we all got fired with the same enthusiasm. It was a labour of love. We did as much as we could to increase the production values on each of the shots, and Ridley was the key to us doing that. He pushed and pushed and pushed us all the time.
This is the sketch that I did of the Narcissus shuttlecraft, the original back section here having been built as a set and having been done as a drawing by Ron Cobb, the conceptual artist. I then came up with this idea of what the nose would look like, and it was from this that the final model was constructed. And also just a very, very quick sketch showing the rear section. This was to enable me to work out the release clamp, which I also built, which drops the Narcissus down from the Nostromo and then releases. As it did so, the word purge came up. When I went to see Blade Runner, there's a shot where the car takes off and you see a screen, and there's the clamp arm from Alien on there, which I'd actually designed, and purge come up. And I thought, that is amazing. I wonder how many people noticed that. We had a shot which required the burial shroud where John Hurt's character Kane has died to be fired out of the Nostromo's hatch. Now, many people would think, there'd be sort of computerised ways of doing this, but not at all. I mentioned Nick Alder, that became the special effects director. We had a very, very large section of Nostromo built, about 40 feet long, which was supposed to be kind of the underside, like a trench on the underside of Nostromo, very reminiscent of the trench in Star Wars. I'm sure there was a crossover there. And what we actually did was I carved, and again I given a very short period of time to carve Kane's burial shroud in wood, and I made a burial shroud about 8 inches long. And Nick Alder got hold of the fisherman's catapult for firing bait out into the pond where you're fishing, and he just put a flat right down at the end of the studio, and he just pulled the catapult back and fired my little model, and it went down the trench. And of course they filmed it at high speed, so it came out in slow motion. And he just did this over and over again. And what they did was, of course, it would drop eventually as it flew away, eventually its trajectory, like an arrow, it would drop down. But they cut it before it did that. And I just thought that was just the most amazing piece of
the marriage between matte painting and model and the screen. It's always tricky, very tricky. But you know, even today in CGI, still see the whole flipping matte. And I always like to go for wherever you can, build a model, then photograph it with the light that's on the shot, and then graft it onto it.
CGI has probably, in my personal opinion, as a model maker, it's decimated much of the model making. I don't think myself that CGI will ever completely replace models. I don't care what anybody says. I think you can tell. There was a great deal of fun going on. Some of the people involved in the film. We had Nick Alder, who was basically the special effects director after Brian left. He's a real prankster. I'd worked with him on Space 1999 and know what he was like. So the relationship was actually very good. I got on very well with the guys. I'd worked with them before. With the actual crew itself, it was a very happy relationship that we had, bearing in mind we were working together for, like I've said, about 14 months.
Technology advances, you can think of new ways of doing things. There were lots of things we could have probably enhanced the production value on. We could have done huge moves through the vehicles and things, which we didn't do. But in actual fact, because the script was so beautifully written and so tight, and because Ridley was really clever with the way we didn't see Alien, but we sort of saw the alien and everything else, we were just there to sort of remind people that there was a bit of space outside and they were billions of miles from anywhere. We didn't need to do any more than that. You know, the production values enhanced what was going on in terms of the drama, but it didn't have to be a visual effects extravaganza as such to save a movie. I mean, we just enhanced what was already there, as opposed to other movies, some of recently that have come out, which are visual effects tour de forces, but no story. I mean, the key to this was the amazing story.